How far can a mother go under the influence of someone who isn't even part of her own family? Have you ever heard of someone who transforms like a chameleon for their own protection? This is one of the craziest cases with imposter syndrome that you'll ever hear about in your life. And I'll just tell you one thing, don't trust anyone in this world. So, my shipwrecked friends of this channel, welcome to another long video on the channel. Today we're going to talk about the insane case that inspired the movie Orphan, which is about a totally imposter girl. And she did everything, even pretending to be a child and changing her personalities to get what she wanted. So, come with me. Klara Mauerova was born in the city of Kurim, in the former Czechoslovakia, in 1975. Klara was always a very religious person. She grew up being very religious. That's because her parents taught her that everyone should accomplish a great work in life. Since childhood, she was someone who had psychological problems and was maladjusted, and she was also someone who was always very obsessed with the mystical life. It turns out that her parents had a complicated life, and they ended up separating, and they also ended up distancing themselves from religion. But Klara was always obsessed with religion. She believed she needed to accomplish a great work in life, and she even believed she was Joan of Arc. Klara also had this mystical obsession and this thing for everything supernatural. This was also because she was a schizophrenic person. Klara also had a sister, Katerina, who was 7 years younger than her, and who also suffered from the same mental and psychological problems as she did. Her mother was someone who didn't help much, with these problems, especially since she was always warned about the problems her daughters had. But she never really paid much attention to that. In fact, even when she moved to a new place, and when she saw that people were starting to notice the psychological and mental problems her daughters had, she would end up moving again, instead of trying to solve the problem.
There was even a situation in their childhood when Klara tried to suffocate Katerina so that she could die in the convent where they studied, because she believed that after her sister was dead, she could bring her back to life.
Klara was medicated, right? She went through medical treatments for these problems, but her mother didn't let her continue the treatment, so it didn't go forward. A few years went by. Klara decided to leave home, and she even started studying engineering at a university. At that time, she also ended up having a big fight with her mother, and she ended up distancing herself from her own mother, Klara. Later, she met a man who was much older than her, and she went to live with him in a suburb of Prague. For a few years, they lived very well together. And she ended up putting her mystical and crazy thoughts about religiosity aside for a while. So they ended up having 2 children. The children were named Andred and Jabob. But as the years went by, Klara became a jealous and obsessive woman. They had constant fights at home, and one of those fights even led a social worker to visit their house to see if everything was okay. That was because of concern for the children, right? And all these problems led them to separate. Klara then got custody of the children and ended up moving to a town called Group, which is a neighboring city to Prague. But at that time, she started having twisted thoughts again about religion and mysticism. And she said that she should accomplish a great work and that this marriage had taken her away from religious life. Her sister, Katerina, had also gone through several problems, including spending time in various support institutions, and she was arrested several times for prostitution. At that point, Klara was feeling very lonely, so she made a proposal to Katerina for them to live together. So Klara, Katerina, and Klara's 2 children ended up living together. Katerina's life going through support institutions made her meet a lot of good people and also some bad people. It was then during this time that Katerina ended up meeting Barbara Skarlova, a woman who was 33 years old. But she suffered from a rare glandular disease that kept her from growing, so she always looked like a child. Barbara took advantage of these conditions, even to get everything she wanted, even pretending to be a man. She has done that before. Barbara was even adopted by a couple, but they later gave her back because they noticed her aggressive and strange behavior in daily life. Barbara spent a long time undergoing psychiatric treatment. But whenever she went to a support facility, she always ended up running away from those places, and it was during one of those times that she ended up escaping. That's where she met Katerina. As soon as Barbara meets the sisters and they get closer, Barbara convinces both of them that she needs to live with them. That's because she had already realized how easy it was to psychologically manipulate both of them. Barbara then realizes that the sisters were very fanatical about this whole religiosity thing, so she also convinces them to attend a religious sect called the Grail Movement. The sect was founded by Oskar Ernst Bernhard. I think that's how you spell it, but I'll leave it here for you to see that he was a German who had thousands of followers around the world. And he presented himself as if he were the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. And the movement of the sect was based on the scriptures he wrote from 1923 to 1938. But not everything was perfect. He was also indicted for molesting children, abusing children, encouraging the reading of satanic books, and urging his followers to even drink blood. Oskar Ernst ended up disappearing after World War II, and with him the movement also vanished. But in 1980, this movement ended up resurfacing. That was when they ended up discovering the sect and ended up believing again in everything that this sect preached. This sect supported slavery, supported child sexuality, supported several heavy things. All this in the name of supposed libertarianism, right? It's a very bizarre thing. In the meantime, Barbara had already made Klara dress very bizarrely, right? Shave her head, shave her hair, wear some weird clothes, sometimes clothes that made her look like she was homeless, not showering for several days. Barbara was making her become a totally strange person. They also started attending a lot of religious meetings that even took place inside their house. It was filled with a lot of really bizarre things, like orgies, drugs, and things like that. At those meetings, Barbara started pretending to be Klara's daughter, and she took it so seriously that she really was Klara's daughter. She started getting jealous of Klara's children, Klara's sister Katerina. She didn't take part in the meetings, but she ended up accepting it, right? She accepted it very well and supported Klara and Barbara going to those meetings. Barbara then, jealous of the children, started making up thousands of things that the children did. She started telling this to Klara, right? She started to influence as if the children were wrong in everything they did. Klara, not knowing what to do, ended up asking Barbara what she could do, right? In fact, it was Barbara who made this up, and Klara went to ask her about it. Barbara started by influencing Klara to beat the children and to leave them for long periods without food. That was the beginning. She also started putting it in Klara's head that the children were possessed, so they needed to lock them up somewhere. That's how they bought a cage and took those children to the basement of the house and left them there locked inside a cage. The children inside that cage could only get food from time to time through the bars, and they spent hours and hours in there. But with the influence of the cult and the madness of the three, that ended up turning into a big show of horrors, and all of this in the name of faith. Then Barbara convinced Klara to take the boys' clothes off, and they started to stay naked inside the cage. They also couldn't take a bath. They had to relieve themselves right there where they slept, and they couldn't cry because whenever they cried, they got beaten. Then Barbara came up with the idea that Klara should torture the children to try to force the demon living inside them to come out, and from there, things just got worse. They did horrible things to them. They burned them with cigarettes. They gave them electric shocks. They practiced drowning with both of them, and they also did this during the religious meetings they held at their house. They ended up cutting pieces of their skin and putting the blood in a bucket. And then they mixed this blood with wine and served it to the guests at the meeting. And they also drank this wine with the children's blood. As if that wasn't enough, they also pulled the children's little arms and legs out, cut some pieces from their legs and arms, and ended up practicing cannibalism, eating in front of them. And they saw everything. What's even stranger is that they held these religious meetings inside their own house. Many people passed by there. and no one had ever noticed anything strange, nothing different happening inside. At a certain time, one of the leaders of the sect, whom they called Doctor, would visit their house. And then they started giving a lot of sweets to the children, so the children would get chubbier so they could look better presented. And Barbara even talked to Klara so they could offer this child as a sacrifice, something Klara absolutely did not accept. At this point, at a certain moment, the boys even managed to escape from the cage. They ended up there in the backyard of the house, but Barbara saw them, grabbed them, and put them back in the cage. The neighbors thought that strange activity in the house was really odd and would sometimes ask about the children. Klara had even forged a letter to pretend that the children were with their father, just to reassure the neighbors. But even so, they still thought that situation was very, very strange. After the children end up escaping from the cage, Barbara convinces her sisters that they should buy some baby equipment, which are those cameras you put in a baby's room, so they could put it down in the basement to keep an eye on them. This was for the times when they weren't there, which was lucky for the two of them and by some grace. The equipment they ended up buying is the same equipment that the neighbor also had. And for some reason, the images from the equipment end up conflicting with each other. And the image that was supposed to show up in their house ends up showing up in the neighbor's house. And the neighbor started to notice what was happening inside. With that, he took those images and ended up going to the police with them on May 10th, 2007. The police end up going to their house and find Klara and Katerina, who start kicking and screaming. They asked them not to go down. They didn't want them to go down to the basement to see what was happening, but even so, the police went down. At that moment, when they tried to stop the police officers from entering the basement, the officers ended up putting both of them in the police car and went down to the basement. When they got there, they came across a bizarre situation, which they described as the most bizarre, revolting, and a horror show. As soon as they entered the place, they encountered a strong smell. There was a lot of urine and a lot of feces. On the floor, the wall was all stained with blood, and there were several strange symbols painted with blood, even on the wall. The two children were inside the cage, and next to the cage there was a third child who was a 12-year-old girl named Annika. And she claimed to be a victim of the two, Klara and Katerina. One of the children was unconscious and the other was in shock. So, the police took the three children and ended up taking Annika, the 12-year-old girl they found together with the other two children. Actually, it was Barbara pretending to be a child, and she staged this whole act and ended up getting away with it. The children had many wounds on their bodies, were suffering from severe infections, and showed clear signs of dehydration. The police even found it strange that the 12-year-old child was completely normal compared to the other children, who were all in that condition. So, they ended up taking the children upstairs while the sisters were inside the police car. And with all that commotion in front of the house, Barbara managed to escape. That's right, she ran away from the place. Later, the two sisters ended up accusing Barbara of being responsible for everything. And this was a case that was bizarre and made headlines throughout the Czech Republic and even around the world. The children received medical treatment, they were hospitalized, and they also received psychological care. During the trial, one of the children, the oldest, Odred, who was 12 years old, testified against his mother and aunt. And he ended up describing everything they went through there, all the horrible things they experienced. During the trial, 3 of the jurors ended up feeling sick from seeing and hearing this story. And someone who was there watching the trial grabbed a hammer and tried to attack Klara with it. This made the judge decide that from that point on, the trial would be held behind closed doors. The sisters' lawyer claims the sisters are innocent. He also claimed that Barbara ended up taking advantage of their innocence and psychological fragility to carry out this whole plan. But in the meantime, where was Barbara? On the day Barbara ran away, she fled to Germany and went to a relative's house, but soon after she left there and went to Norway. With the identity of a 13-year-old child from then on, she would start using this child's identity, which would be that of a 13-year-old boy. She ended up being adopted by a couple in Norway, and she ended up spending a year living with this couple. On the day she was arrested, this couple also went into shock. That's because they adopted a 12-year-old child and ended up discovering that she was not this 12-year-old child, and that she wasn't a boy, she was a girl. So they were stunned, they really went into shock. Barbara was then extradited to the Czech Republic, where she was tried along with her sisters. During the trial, Klara made the following statement: "Terrible things happened, and only now do I realize it. I couldn't understand how I let everything happen. I believe I was influenced by the words of someone who convinced me to do evil. I was weak and couldn't resist. All I ask is forgiveness for my actions." The psychologists ended up certifying that the sisters suffered from a severe case of schizophrenia. In March 2009, the Superior Court of Olomouc sentenced Klara to spend 7 years in a psychiatric institution. Her sister Katerina also received a sentence of 8 years in another psychiatric hospital. Barbara was not sentenced to prison, but she was sent to an institution which was like a prison. It was an institution, but she was sent to an institution for criminals with mental illnesses. After Barbara's case was studied by specialists, she started receiving drug treatment to stimulate her growth. Barbara didn't want her appearance to change. She wanted to keep that childlike look, so she tried to reverse the situation. She was supposed to avoid this treatment, but a new trial decided she would get it regardless of her wishes. What is known is that Barbara still lives in a forensic psychiatric hospital in Prague, and there is no expected date for her release. The children, thank God, recovered from all this trauma. They recovered physically and mentally, and today they live with their father. In Hungary, this case became known as the worst case of child abuse in European history. The case was reported in newspapers all over the world, and there were also several news stories here in Brazil at the time. And to this day, this case is still widely discussed all around the world. And also, Barbara's strange personality ended up inspiring the movie Orphan. I'll leave the movie here for you to check out. It's available on both Home Box Office Max and Prime Video platforms. Guys, it's bizarre, right? It's bizarre to think that someone can be so manipulative, pull off so many tricks, and mess with another person's mind like that, right? I always say that for me, criminals shouldn't be intelligent, but there are criminals who are much smarter than people who don't have evil in their hearts. Well, if you like this case, I ask you to leave your like, your thumbs up, which really helps me a lot in spreading this video. You have no idea how much you help me by leaving a like here. Share this story with your friends too. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any updates. And you won't miss any videos that come out here on my channel. Thank you so much for sticking with me until now, and see you in the next video. I'm out.